Imagine this, I'm out on our 40-acre family farm in Montana, coffee in hand, steam curling up from the mug as the rising sun turns the mountains a glowing gold. Suddenly, my phone buzzes. 911 dispatch here. We've received a report of trespassing. You need to vacate the property immediately. I couldn't help but laugh. What would you do if someone called the police on you for standing on land your family's owned for generations? I took out my leather badge wallet. Mom, you can inform the caller that Deputy Sheriff Ezra Blackwood is exactly where he's supposed to be. Through the oversized windows of the neighboring McMansion, I spotted Karen Peaton's face go pale as snow. She still had her luxury binoculars glued to her eyes like some suburban spy. Diesel fumes, hay, and the morning mist hung in the air, and I knew why things were about to get real. What would you do in my boots? Drop a comment. And while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from. I have a feeling more than a few of you have run-ins worthy of the Anna drama nest. Let me rewind a bit and explain how this whole circus got started. I'm Ezra Blackwood. I am 45, and after 15 years working as a deputy sheriff and a rough divorce not long ago, I came back to the farm my grandfather left me. 40 acres of untouched Montana land, passed down since Grandpa Jeremiah bought it with his GI Bill after the war. The old barn still carries the scent of grease and generations of honest sweat. It's the kind of place where I learned to fix engines at 8 years old and always thought I'd grow old in peace. Then came Willowbrook Estates, built right along my property line. A sea of 47 oversized homes, all with perfectly matched mailboxes and seasonal garden flags. Most of the people who moved in turned out to be decent neighbors. They'd swing by my little farm stand for produce and let their kids feed my goat, Buttercup. Yes, her name is Buttercup, don't judge me. But then came Karen Peaton, 52, platinum hair that costs more each month than most people's rent, and a PhD in art history she mentioned like it was her social security number. Her husband Braden ran Peaton Construction, the company responsible for building Willowbrook, and they occupied the biggest house on the block, with a lawn that probably got more water than my entire crop field. It all started on a Tuesday. I heard the sharp sound of high heels clicking on gravel. Karen strutted across my boundary line, holding a thick manila folder like it was an FBI case file. Her perfume was so strong it made my chickens freeze mid-peck. "Mr. Blackwood," she called out, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm here on official Anna drama nest business." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Mom, far as I know, I'm not under your jurisdiction." Her laugh was the sound of a dying engine. "Oh, but you are now." When Willowbrook Estates was officially organized, your land was grandfathered into our community regulations. She handed me a certified letter like it was a subpoena. "You've got 30 days to get this farm compliant." I skimmed through the legal jargon, eyes burning. The message was clear: dismantle the barn, tear down the chicken coop, shut down the farm stand, and get rid of all farm equipment. On top of that, $500 a day in fines if I didn't obey. Suddenly, that fresh morning coffee turned bitter. Karen stood there, arms folded, looking like she'd just outsmarted a chess master. "Property values depend on consistent visual standards," she lectured. But I caught something in her eyes, something greedy. She wasn't just talking about aesthetics. She kept glancing at my land like she was sizing it up for something much bigger. She called it a hobby farm, said it was ruining everyone's resale value. But something didn't sit right. Most of my Willowbrook neighbors liked what I brought to the community. They stopped by regularly. Their kids loved Buttercup. Some even told me it was a relief to have a slice of real country living nearby. Karen, she had gathered a small clique of supporters who believed my land was ruining their suburban dream. And she wasn't shy about threatening lawsuits if the town council didn't enforce her version of standards. That evening, I sat on my porch with Buttercup beside me, watching the sun vanish behind the mountains. And it hit me, this wasn't about rules. It wasn't about visual harmony or neighborhood values. The way Karen eyed my acreage, coupled with her husband's construction business, a broken bar. This was about control, power, and land. The kind people like them don't want you to hold on to. The sound of her heels crunching over gravel kept replaying in my head. If she was willing to call 911 on a law enforcement officer standing on his own soil, I knew she wasn't going to stop at a letter. And sure enough, she didn't. Just days after her warning, she filed a complaint with the zoning board, accusing me of creating a public health threat. Said my animals were attracting pests, and the waste posed a danger. She even passed around a petition and got 12 out of 47 households to sign. Hardly a rebellion. Still, she uploaded it to the Willowbrook Facebook group like she just won a county election. The photos she shared were misleading, a shot at weird angles, making my tidy little coop look like a disaster zone. But this is where Karen overplayed her hand. She never actually read the community's founding documents. 15 years of law enforcement taught me, people often skip the fine print. Karen was banking on that. I wasn't. I headed to the courthouse and requested the full record of Willowbrook's formation. The records office smelled like stale coffee and paperwork older than me. I spread the dusty documents on a cold metal desk, hearing my old sergeant's voice in my head. The devil hides in the details. And there it was. Subsection 12C. Tucked deep in the original agreement. Existing agricultural operations shall be permanently exempt from all aesthetic and operational restrictions. Permanently exempt. Those words were gold. Everything Karen was trying to do had no legal ground. I couldn't wait to see her plan fall apart. Then I decided to flip the script. If she was going to accuse me of creating a health hazard, I'd get an official ruling on my own terms. I called the county health department and requested an inspection. A woman named Janet, who'd been inspecting farms for over 2 decades, arrived to conduct the health inspection. She was thorough, walking every square foot of my property, collecting soil samples, examining the chicken coop with surgical precision, and even checking Buttercup's hooves for disease. When she finished, she chuckled. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "this setup exceeds what we require for organic certification. I've inspected million-dollar agribusinesses that weren't half this clean." The satisfaction I felt was sweeter than anything in my grandma's recipe box. While I worked on locking down my legal defense, something unexpected happened. Braden Petona, Karen's husband, approached me quietly one evening as I was closing up the farm stand. He looked uneasy, constantly darting his eyes back toward his house like he didn't want to get caught. "Ezra," he said, voice low, "what would it take for you to sell the place?" Then he added, "I'm talking 40% over market value. Cash. We'll take care of all the paperwork." 40% over value for land they claimed was lowering the neighborhood's worth? That offer rang louder than any alarm bell. My instincts from detective training kicked in. When someone's actions don't match their excuses, follow the money. This wasn't about tidy lawns or picturesque streets. Karen and Braden had plans for my land, a big honor, and they were ready to pay handsomely to get it. I smiled and told him, "Appreciate the offer, but this farm's not for sale. Not now, not ever." His expression said he expected that response but had been hoping for something else. "Between us," he added, "when Karen sets her mind to something, a broken bar." He didn't finish the sentence, but the warning hung heavy in the air. Then the public tide began turning. A local paper published a story titled "Deputy's Farm Under Fire from Anadrama Nest," and suddenly, support came flooding in. Farmers from nearby towns dropped by to show solidarity. 3 families from Willowbrook who had signed Karen's petition publicly withdrew their names. One even posted online, "We didn't know the full story when we signed." Blackwood Farm is part of what makes this community feel real. That's when my training as a deputy went into full gear. I began treating this like any official investigation. Every interaction with Karen got documented. Every conversation recorded. Montana's one-party consent law had helped in countless domestic cases before. It worked just as well for documenting harassment under the Anadrama Nest umbrella. Every email, every letter photocopied and filed. I'd seen too many cases unravel because of a single missing document. Karen, realizing she was losing support, doubled down. She became louder, more aggressive. She took to social media daily with updates on the so-called agricultural emergency in Willowbrook, posting long rants with zoomed-in, misleading photos that made it feel like she had surveillance cameras aimed at my land. Her footsteps on my gravel drive became as routine as sunrise. And with every visit came new threats, new complaints, each more ridiculous than the last. But something beautiful started happening too. The families who backed out of Karen's crusade, they started stopping by the farm stand. They brought friends or people who'd never visited before. Word started spreading outside of Willowbrook. There was this farm where the tomatoes were unmatched, the goat was friendly, and your kids could see where their food came from, all while supporting a deputy who refused to cave to intimidation. It dawned on me that Karen had made her biggest misstep. By turning this into a public spectacle instead of handling it quietly, she exposed herself. In a place where people value honesty, grit, and standing your ground, she picked a fight with someone who wasn't going to fold. And desperate people tend to make reckless decisions. In a bolder and wildly foolish move, Karen filed a false police report. She claimed I had threatened her with violence. Ironically, I was on duty when the report came through. My sergeant glanced at the paperwork, frowning in disbelief. Blackwood, he said, Karen Peter's saying you told her you'd deal with her permanently. Want to explain that one? I didn't say a word. Just handed over my phone and played the body cam footage I'd been recording since this mess began. On the screen, Karen could be seen doing most of the shouting. I was standing still, arms folded, calmly asking her to leave. The most threatening thing I said, that I'd resolve the matter through appropriate legal steps. Apparently, that counted as a threat in Karen's imagination. My sergeant shook his head and filed a claim where we keep all the nonsense reports of the crazy neighbor file. That same day, animal control showed up at my door. Karen had reported dangerous livestock posing a public threat. The officer stepped out of his truck, looked around, and saw 3 docile chickens quietly pecking in the coop while Buttercup nibbled grass by the fence. He looked at me with the same expression people get when they realize they've been set up. She said you had aggressive animals, he said. I was expecting something with horns and bloodlust, not a goat trying to lick my boot. His official report labeled the animals as exceptionally well behaved and zero threat to public safety. But Karen wasn't done. Her next tactic, she started parking her BMW directly in front of the farm stand during peak hours, claiming she was monitoring traffic. The irony was thicker. Karen, the woman constantly complaining about traffic near my farm, was now the one creating it. Parked right in front of my farm stand in her high-end BMW, she sat there with a clipboard, scribbling down license plates like some self-appointed suburban surveillance officer. My security cameras captured everything. She even got out occasionally to scold families for supporting what she called an agricultural nuisance that was lowering their property values. But if there's one thing I learned from years spent handling heated domestic cases, it's this: documentation beats confrontation every time. Karen clearly wanted a scene, a shouting match she could twist into a new complaint. Instead, I stayed calm. I began submitting formal harassment and obstruction reports, backed by photos, videos, and precise timestamps. Every encounter was documented, every tactic recorded. I was building a case so airtight even the slickest lawyer would have trouble poking holes in it. Her previous stunt of filing a false police report ended up blowing up in her face. It became a running joke around the station. My fellow deputies started calling my place Montana's most dangerous tomato farm, and even the sheriff made it a point to stop by and buy produce, making a show of how peaceful and well kept everything was. When Karen tried again, this time accusing me of aggressive fertilizing at dawn, a dispatch didn't even flinch. They placed her on hold and calmly explained that farming wasn't, in fact, a crime. While Karen burned through what little credibility she had left, I kept digging. Braden's too good to be true offer had been gnawing at me. So I paid another visit to the county planning overseer, and that's when the full picture came into focus. Then it was Preliminary sketches for a luxury expansion projector featuring my land are filed months before Karen ever filed her first complaint. This wasn't some random vendetta from a nosy neighbor. It was a targeted effort to push me off land they needed for their next big development. The news of Karen's driveway blocking antics spread fast, and then something incredible happened. 3 local veterans, guys who'd never even shopped at my stand before, started showing up on weekends. They brought lawn chairs and coffee, parking themselves near the entrance, making sure customers could come and go freely. No threats, no shouting, just a quiet presence that made Karen look like the odd one out. My favorite moment: Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher from Willowbrook, walked right up to Karen during one of her stakeouts. "Excuse me, dear," she said in that firm teacher voice that stops kids mid-chaos. "You're blocking the best tomatoes in the region. Either buy something or move your car." The look on Karen's face when she realized her neighbors were no longer backing her crusade, worth every frustrating moment up to that point. And the kicker? Her smear campaign had the exact opposite effect. What had once been a modest little operation was now the most talked about farm in the county. Folks were driving in from towns miles away, just to buy vegetables from the deputy standing up to the anadrama nest bullies. Karen had accidentally launched the most successful marketing campaign I could have imagined. But I knew better than to get comfortable. Her behavior was becoming more erratic, more hostile. When someone like her starts losing control, the only certainty is that they're going to do something reckless. The real question wasn't if she'd push things too far, but how far she'd go before stepping over a line she couldn't cross back from. Whenever she showed up, the scent of her overpowering perfume mingled with the diesel from my tractor, 2 smells that had become oddly familiar. And I had a feeling they'd both be sticking around for a while. Karen had officially escalated the fight. She brought in Harrison Kempo, a pricey attorney from the state capital who billed more than most folks make in a week. His specialty? Property value protection, a fancy way of saying he helped people weaponize legal threats. Their next move? A full-blown civil lawsuit. They accused my farm of causing over $200,000 in lost value to properties across Willowbrook and demanded an emergency injunction to shut me down immediately. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was a financial ambush, a legal siege designed to wear me down and force me to fold. What they didn't know, I wasn't going in alone. My ex, Sarah, now a prosecutor, had been quietly advising me behind the scenes. Over coffee one day, she said, "Ezra, this guy has a playbook. He's pulled the same stunt in at least 4 counties. His whole strategy relies on folks being too broke or too scared to fight back." But I wasn't either of those things. I had the most important weapon: documentation. I had been compiling everything from day one. And more importantly, I was starting to see the bigger picture. Something didn't add up. Karen's obsession with my farm wasn't just about money or even about power. My instincts were screaming that this was part of something larger. So I started tracking their moves like I used to track criminal operations, following the paper trail, cross-checking documents, digging into records. What I uncovered changed everything. Peton Construction had been pulling this exact same stunt for years. 3 other rural property owners in neighboring counties had been hit with identical harassment campaigns. Every time, the pattern was the same: identify farmland next to a proposed development, weaponize anadrama nest rules to bully the owner into selling cheap, and flip the land through shell companies for massive gains. Each victim ended up losing their family land at a fraction of what it was worth. The most shocking part: the district attorney's office was already looking into it. There had been previous murmurs about Peton Construction's shady tactics, but no one had ever connected the dots until I walked into the DA's office with 5 years' worth of detailed documentation. "This isn't just some petty neighborhood squabble," the district attorney said, fanning out my files across the table. "This is deliberate, organized fraud. And you've brought us the trail." While I worked on building a criminal case, Karen was busy crafting her own downfall. Her behavior had taken a wild turn: midnight walks along my fence line, photographing customers' license plates, and filing complaints about everything from noisy chickens to so-called intimidating vegetable displays. She was unknowingly compiling evidence of her own harassment campaign. But then she made a truly reckless move as she tried to bribe Bob Martinez, the county's building inspector, to condemn my barn as unsafe. What Karen didn't realize was that Bob had inspected that same barn twice in recent years and knew it was as solid as they come. When she slid a cash-stuffed envelope across a coffee shop table, Bob walked out and went straight to the sheriff. She offered me $2,000 in cash to write up bogus violations, he reported. I've seen desperate people before, but this lady, she's off the deep end. That marked her first clear felony offense. But when I told Sarah, the prosecutor, and my former partner, she advised me not to press charges just yet. Let her keep going, she said. Every move she makes adds another charge. And when people like this spiral, they don't slow down. They crash hard. Meanwhile, the support I was getting from the community kept growing. Veterans from nearby towns were organizing weekend support. The farm rallies of families came not just to buy produce, but to stand against bullying. The county fair committee even asked me to give a talk on preserving rural agriculture in growing suburban areas, and I started receiving outreach from neighboring counties dealing with eerily similar harassment cases. What started as a personal battle had become something bigger, a grassroots movement defending rural landowners' rights against aggressive development and intimidation. But then Karen made her most catastrophic mistake. Convinced she was losing control, she began spreading rumors that I was using my farm stand as cover for drug trafficking. She filed police reports claiming to witness suspicious nighttime behavior, including vehicles arriving after dark and alleged package exchanges. She was describing nothing more than people buying produce after work. Still, the claims were serious enough to trigger a DA investigation. Federal agents arrived unannounced, prepared for something shady. What they actually found: a law-abiding, off-duty deputy growing heirloom tomatoes and raising chickens. What they didn't expect to find was a neatly organized case file documenting months of systematic harassment, and multiple false reports are filed by the same woman who had triggered the investigation. The lead agent, Detective Riley, illustrated talking, no-nonsense type. He reviewed everything. Deputy, she said, flipping through the records, this is no longer a neighborhood dispute. What you've got here qualifies for federal fraud and false reporting charges. This is organized harassment, plain and simple. That evening, sitting on the porch while Buttercup chewed quietly nearby, the air tasted different. The scent of ripe tomatoes and the sound of calm silence reminded me I was finally close to the end of the storm. Karen's high-priced attorney had already started distancing himself, clearly uncomfortable with how far she'd taken things. Even Braden had begun making discreet phone calls, trying to minimize the fallout. But Karen, she was too far gone to accept defeat. You could see it in her eyes, watching from her window like a general plotting one final battle, one she couldn't afford to lose. Then came the moment that turned everything on its head. While digging through the law library, researching legal precedents for the Anna drama nest, I got this itch in the back of my mind. Why hadn't Karen's legal team ever submitted the original incorporation documents during the lawsuit? Any legitimate organization should have them ready to go. So I went straight to the source. I filed a request for the full public record of Willowbrook Estates filings, of everything required by Montana state law for the legal creation of a community organization. What I found in that dusty manila folder made my stomach drop. There was no legally established Anna drama nest, not even close. The envelope should have held official incorporation documents filed with the Secretary of State, registration forms, bonding information, and financial oversight documentation. Instead, a few poorly written meeting minutes and a photocopied form downloaded from the internet. For 5 years, Karen had been collecting dues, imposing fines, and enforcing rules under the illusion of authority, when in reality, it was nothing more than an unregistered neighborhood group masquerading as a governing body. But the real blow came after we subpoenaed the financial records through the district attorney's office. Every cent ever collected for this so-called Anna drama nest, more than $300,000 was sitting in a single personal checking account. The name on that account? K. Peton, administrator. No separate business entity, no board of directors, no required oversight. Just Karen, taking her neighbor's money and putting it straight into her own private bank account. The financial records read like the blueprint of a fraud operation. A lavish European vacation disguised as an anadrama nest conference. BMW payments tucked under administrative expenses. A private pool remodel billed as a community improvement initiative. For nearly 5 years, Karen had been using anadrama nest funds like a personal credit card, confident no one would challenge her power long enough to realize she never had any legal authority to begin with. Sitting there, surrounded by undeniable evidence of calculated embezzlement, I finally understood the depth of her desperation to keep everything hidden. This wasn't about tidy lawns or preserving home values. This was about shielding a money-making scam that had fueled her lifestyle from the very beginning. Every false report, every baseless complaint, every attempt to sabotage my livelihood, it had all been part of Karen's effort to stop anyone from uncovering the truth. The legal weight of what I'd discovered hit hard. Running a fake organization while collecting payments under false pretenses opened the door to serious federal charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion, and the tax side alone, that could financially wipe out her entire family, even if she somehow avoided prison time. Here's the ironic twist. Every single resident in Willowbrook had the legal right to demand a full refund of every dollar they'd ever paid. Why? Because they were unknowingly paying into a scam. Every fine Karen had issued was invalid. Every so-called assessment notice was backed by nothing. She hadn't been managing a neighborhood as she'd been running a glorified extortion scheme. When I called Sarah over at the prosecutor's office to share what I'd uncovered, her reaction said it all. "Ezra," she said, practically buzzing, "this is like Christmas morning for a prosecutor. You've got 5 solid years of fraud here, all meticulously documented, and the paper trail leads directly to Karen's personal bank account." She was so confident in her made-up authority, she didn't even try to cover her tracks. Suddenly, Braden's anxious behavior made perfect sense. He knew the house of cards his wife had built was about to collapse. Their construction company, their public image, their luxury lifestyle, it all hinged on Karen's fake empire staying intact and unquestioned. Now I saw why she escalated every time someone pushed back. Any threat to her authority risked bringing the whole scheme to light. For her, surrender didn't just mean losing face, it meant financial destruction and a prison sentence. Justice was finally within reach, but I knew we were just getting started. Karen was about to find out that you can't build an empire on lies and expect it to last. Eventually, it crumbles, and when it does, it takes everything with it. The next morning, I walked into Sarah Hawthorne's office with 5 boxes of evidence and a plan that would upend Karen's world. Sarah laid out the bank statements across her table, shaking her head at the sheer boldness of it all. There were transactions showing Karen's personal spending spree, all funded by money extracted from her neighbors. "Ezra," she said, "this isn't some petty neighborhood feud. Your neighbor has been running a criminal operation disguised as community management." The charges were stacking up like items on a receipt: to embezzlement, fraud, bribery, false reporting, tax evasion. Because Karen used electronic transfers and postal mail to collect fraudulent dues, we could now tack on federal wire fraud and mail fraud to offenses with long prison sentences. The most remarkable part? Karen had documented almost everything herself. Most criminals try to hide their tracks. Karen framed her so literally. She turned her fraud into a display of pride. Still, we needed more than legal ammunition. We needed a smart strategy, one that exposed her publicly and protected the residents who had been duped. That's when I remembered something from my early patrol days. Sometimes the most effective way to catch a criminal is to let them think they're winning. Right up until the cuffs snap into place. Legally, we were well positioned. Montana's one-party consent law meant every conversation I recorded with Karen was fully admissible. The state's corporate fraud laws required full reimbursement to victims. And the money, still sitting untouched in her personal account, to a financial smoking gun. Most importantly, because she'd never officially registered the anadrama nest as a real entity, Every decision she made over the past 5 years was completely illegitimate. As I quietly built support within the community, I turned to allies I trusted. Judge Patricia Morrison, recently retired and living nearby, had been observing Karen's antics with growing interest. Ezra, she told me over a cup of coffee, I've seen mob cases with less evidence. She's been so wrapped up in pretending to be in charge, she never realized she had no legal standing at all. The local veterans who'd been backing my farm stepped up again this time as my investigation team. Together, we organized 5 years' worth of records, correspondence, and witness statements into a case file any federal prosecutor would be thrilled to receive. My buddy Mike from the Sheriff's Department, Mike helped connect me with state-level investigators who had been monitoring similar fraudulent schemes popping up across Montana. But this is where our strategy became truly effective. Instead of arresting Karen right away, we decided to let her keep digging herself deeper. She doesn't realize we've uncovered the financial scam, Sarah explained. Every time she sends a fine or makes a threat under her fake anadrama nest, it's another criminal offense. She's adding to the list daily. Meanwhile, residents of Willowbrook were learning they had rights they didn't even know existed. As news spread that the anadrama nest was never legally registered, 43 households stopped making payments immediately. Even better, they were now legally entitled to recover every cent they had paid, and that money could still be traced directly to Karen's personal bank accounts. The timing had to be flawless. Karen had planned what she described as a mandatory emergency meeting for all residents. She was preparing to announce stricter enforcement policies and new fines. Her notices looked official, complete with fabricated letterhead and bogus legal threats. The irony couldn't have been more satisfying. While preparing to accuse me of wrongdoing, she was actively committing new crimes in broad daylight. I had already been in contact with local media who had been following the story. Channel 7's investigative team saw this as a textbook case of anadrama nest abuse and wanted to capture her downfall on camera. If we time this right, said journalist Janet Walsh, her fake meeting becomes a televised confession. Psychologically, it was all about keeping her confident. Karen still believed she was winning. Her overpriced attorney had backed out quietly, but she continued representing herself with the arrogance of someone who thought yelling louder made her right. She believed that waving fancy-looking documents equaled real power. She had been promoting the meeting as the final answer to the agriculture problem, claiming she would reveal damning evidence of my so-called misconduct. I made sure law enforcement backup was stationed discreetly around the community center, and not for security, but to ensure she couldn't make a run for it when the truth hit. Detective Riley from the State Fraud Division was ready with federal arrest warrants. Karen's accounts were already frozen by the bank. Everything was falling into place. The most poetic part of it all, Karen herself had engineered the perfect setup. She scheduled a fake meeting to assert control she never legally had, intending to use non-existent laws to intimidate people, all while federal investigators recorded her every word. Sometimes justice isn't about vengeance. It's about letting the guilty reveal themselves. That evening, sitting on the porch with Buttercup lazily grazing nearby, I finally felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: a calm. The scent of ripening tomatoes drifted on the breeze, mixing with the cool mountain air. For the first time in ages, I could see the end in sight. Karen Peaton was about to face the greatest lesson of her entitled life. Real power can't be forged, and stolen money always has a price. As her influence collapsed and residents refused to send another dime, Karen became desperate. And in her desperation, she turned her attention straight toward the root of all her problems: my farm. At first, her actions were clumsy, almost laughable. Sabotage attempts that felt more like amateur hour than actual threats. One of my security cameras caught her at 2:30 in the morning, dressed in all black, fumbling with my irrigation system using a crowbar she clearly didn't know how to operate. After 20 minutes of wrestling with the water valve, she gave up and decided to unscrew fertilizer caps, spilling organic nutrients around randomly. The result: ironically, even her sabotage helped the crops. But things escalated. A week later, She tried to destroy my organic certification by spraying commercial herbicide near the crop rows, hoping any trace chemicals would get my permits revoked. Unfortunately for her, she picked the windiest day of the season. Most of the spray blew straight back onto her prized lawn while my crops remained largely untouched. My cameras recorded her horrified reaction as she realized she had just destroyed her own yard. The real danger came with a new wave of false police reports. These weren't just the usual petty complaints. Karen took it further. She began dialing 911 and claiming my produce stand was involved in drug activity. She described normal vegetable transactions as if they were shady package drops. She filed reports about suspicious late-night vehicles and large sums of cash, essentially accusing hard-working families of being part of a criminal ring. These baseless allegations triggered a DEA investigation. If things had gone differently, it could have ended my law enforcement career. When federal agents arrived expecting a drug bust and found me a deputy on leave, selling heirloom tomatoes, so they weren't amused. Agent Sarah Martinez reviewed Karen's 17 fabricated reports, all filed with different agencies, and simply shook her head. Deputy Blackwood, this isn't just neighbor drama anymore. This is deliberate obstruction of justice. We're adding federal charges. Karen's panic reached new heights when she tried to bribe the county's building inspector, Bob Martinez, to condemn my barn as unsafe. She arranged a meeting at Murphy's Diner, sliding an envelope across the table. She slid an envelope across the table with $2,000 inside, claiming my barn was a dangerous structure that needed urgent attention. Bob, a seasoned inspector with 3 decades on the job, had already evaluated the barn twice and knew it was sound. He didn't waste a second. He reported the bribery attempt immediately. She asked me to invent violations. He told my captain, that's not just corruption, that's risking lives just to settle a personal grudge. Ironically, her attempt to bribe him gave us exactly what we needed, a concrete felony, with evidence and a reliable witness. Sarah from the district attorney's office was ready to authorize charges, but I asked her to wait. She's doing more damage to herself than we ever could, I explained. Every reckless decision adds more weight to her sentence. The residents were no longer just annoyed, they were alarmed. Karen's behavior had become impossible to ignore. She began approaching my customers at the farm stand, shouting about plummeting property values and accusing them of supporting illegal businesses. When she harassed Mrs. Bennett, an elderly woman just trying to buy tomatoes for her grandkids, it crossed a line. Several onlookers described it as targeted harassment. Mrs. Bennett, a retired federal worker who dealt with real criminals during her career, calmly told Karen she was humiliating herself and dragging down the entire neighborhood. Karen's reputation began collapsing around her. Local stores started denying her service after she berated a teenage grocery employee simply for stocking produce from my farm. The town coffee shop put up a polite but pointed sign, "We support all local farms and expect respectful behavior from every customer." Translation: Karen wasn't welcome if she couldn't act like an adult. Her social media pages became a running log of her psychological unraveling. She started posting wildly paranoid claims about my peaceful little farm, alleging it was a cover for criminal behavior. She uploaded blurry photos taken from inside her bathroom window, trying to spin completely normal farm activities into something nefarious. But instead of gaining traction, her posts went viral for the wrong reasons. People shared them as a cautionary tale of Anna Dramanesque abuse, not as support for her accusations. Then came the tipping point. Karen made a public post calling for concerned citizens to help her carry out surveillance on my property. She encouraged others to bring cameras and anything else they felt necessary to help document the threat she believed my farm posed to the community. That post was enough to get the sheriff's department involved. They interpreted it as a possible safety risk and temporarily seized her firearms pending a mental health review. Karen had evolved from a nosy neighbor to a federal-level problem. Her obsession had created enough documented offenses to implicate multiple people. And through it all, I simply sat back and recorded every incident. There was something deeply satisfying about it. Our justice drifting in with the mountain breeze as she unraveled one false accusation at a time. In what became her final stretch before everything came crashing down, Karen grew even more erratic. Though most Willowbrook residents had stopped paying dues and federal officials were now actively reviewing her financial activity, she launched what she called a fact-finding campaign to prove I was the actual criminal. Her first move, hiring a private investigator named Marcus Webb to monitor my farm. She offered him $5,000 to find proof of wrongdoing. She was convinced a real professional would finally validate her fantasy. Webb accepted the job, spent 3 days watching me harvest vegetables and rotate compost bins, then called the sheriff's office himself. This woman paid me to find crimes that simply don't exist, he told my captain. When I told her everything was legit, she offered me another $5,000 to make something up. Trying to bribe a licensed investigator added another felony to her growing list of charges. But it also exposed something bigger: Karen was running out of funds. Later, the financial investigation would show she'd cashed out her retirement savings and taken out loans against her home just to sustain her crusade against me. The same woman who once lived comfortably off misappropriated anadrama nest dues was now plunging herself into debt to destroy the person who had exposed her. She became bolder and sloppier. Karen began mailing official-looking letters to my regular customers, warning them that buying from me made them complicit in criminal activity. She threatened to report them to law enforcement. These letters were printed with a forged anadrama nest letterhead, full of fake legal language about community safety guidelines and mandatory reporting obligations. What she failed to realize was this: threatening customers involved in an ongoing federal case is considered witness intimidation, and that's yet another felony. The letters had the opposite effect from what Karen intended. Instead of scaring people away, they united the community against her increasingly unstable antics. Mrs. Patterson even organized a Freedom to Buy Vegetables rally at my farm stand, bringing around 30 neighbors together in support. "This woman thinks she can bully us over where we shop," Mrs. Patterson announced. "I've been buying tomatoes longer than she's been alive. I'll be damned if some anadrama nest tyrant tells me how to spend my money." Not backing down, Karen filed a lengthy complaint with the state agriculture department, alleging that my farm violated organic standards and posed ecological risks. She submitted a 40-page dossier, complete with illegally gathered soil samples from her trespassing episodes and photos taken during her unauthorized surveillance. The state inspector who reviewed her report would later say it was the most thorough example of harassment disguised as environmental activism he'd seen in 20 years. After conducting a full investigation, the Agriculture Department not only cleared my farm of any wrongdoing, they nominated me for a Sustainability Award. The soil samples Karen had stolen actually helped prove that my farming practices exceeded state organic requirements. Once again, her own supposed evidence became proof in my favor. The inspector's findings were added to the growing pile of materials for her eventual prosecution. When official channels failed her, Karen resorted to her most desperate tactic yet, trying to unite regional anadrama nest groups into a so-called agricultural resistance coalition. She reached out to board leaders across 3 counties, warning them that my farm set a dangerous precedent and urging them to take collective action before similar agricultural intrusions happened in their areas. Instead of joining her cause, every anadrama nest leader forwarded her messages straight to law enforcement, flagging them as possible attempts to organize harassment against rural property owners. While Karen spiraled further into criminal territory, something remarkable began to happen around my farm. Her harassment campaign had unintentionally sparked a local movement supporting farming rights. Families began traveling from all over Montana to shop at my stand, and not just for the produce, but to stand with someone pushing back against petty tyranny. Veterans, small business owners, and folks who had dealt with their own neighborhood bullies started showing up every weekend. It became something bigger than me. Karen's chaos gave birth to a regional stand for rural independence. Media attention grew alongside public support. Local papers began covering the anadrama nest versus the farm saga weekly, and Channel 7's investigative team picked up the story. framing Karen's behavior as an example of unchecked community power gone rogue. One of their viral clips showed her alone in her BMW, filming shoppers while yelling at them. It was surreal and it was all caught on tape. Even her own high-priced attorney eventually gave up, citing irreconcilable differences and stating that her conduct made professional representation impossible. Left on her own, Karen filed a string of bizarre court motions demanding emergency injunctions and federal crackdowns to stop what she described as agricultural terrorism infiltrating suburbia. Judge Morrison later called her final court submission legally unintelligible and deeply embarrassing. By this point, Karen had gone from neighborhood nuisance to full-blown federal defendant. In her quest to ruin me, she'd only built the case against herself stronger while unintentionally kick-starting a grassroots movement for rural land rights. Her downfall wasn't just inevitable anima rea, it was echoing across the state. As the final confrontation approached, tension filled the Willowbrook Community Center. Karen had called for an emergency, mandatory meeting. She threatened legal action against anyone who didn't show up for her ultimate reveal of evidence against my so-called criminal farm. Over 80 people packed into the room, neighbors, journalists, and some unfamiliar faces who later revealed themselves to be federal agents. The smell of brewed coffee and nervous anticipation lingered as Karen set up her display, projecting the confidence of someone convinced she was about to deliver a knockout blow. I entered quietly in uniform and took a seat in the back. My badge caught the fluorescent lighting. She noticed. Her eyes lit up as if she'd already won. She'd arranged poster boards with blurry photographs, bar charts, and stuffed manila folders, all part of what she insisted was irrefutable proof of a criminal conspiracy. A hired cameraman stood ready to film what she clearly believed would be her moment of victory. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, in her usual smug tone, "tonight we expose the agricultural threat that's been growing like a weed in our peaceful community. We've allowed criminal activity to hide behind corrupt law enforcement for too long." She spent the next 20 minutes presenting her case with the energy of someone completely detached from reality. Grainy photos of families buying produce were described as coded drug exchanges. Harmless audio clips of farm stand conversations were played, with claims they contained agricultural code for illegal activity. She even held up my business bank statements as supposed evidence of laundering money through underground vegetable sales. The audience began to shift in their seats. Unease spread as they realized just how far Karen had gone. People exchanged glances of disbelief. Many saw themselves in those photos as being tracked and recorded during casual farm visits by someone they thought was just a quirky neighbor. "And here's the smoking gun," Karen shouted, jabbing a finger toward me. "Deputy Ezra Blackwood has used his badge to shield his criminal operation and intimidate honest citizens who dare speak the truth. I've documented 17 clear instances of corruption and abuse of authority," Karen proclaimed, her voice rising with misplaced confidence. She spun dramatically to face the crowd. "I call on this community to perform a citizen's arrest on this corrupt deputy who has violated his oath and terrorized our peaceful neighborhood." The room went completely still. Not a single person moved. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that showed second-hand embarrassment. Karen stood there, oblivious to how far removed from reality she'd become. That's when I stepped forward. My boots echoed through the hushed space as I walked slowly to the front. "Good evening," I said evenly, my tone steady and firm after years in law enforcement. "I'm Deputy Sheriff Ezra Blackwood, and I believe Miss Peaton has been expecting me." Karen's face flickered from smug satisfaction to utter bewilderment. "Miss Peaton, what you've just done is a perfect illustration of why you're being placed under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, filing false reports, and operating an unlicensed organization." I unfolded the warrant and watched confusion dissolve into horror on her face. "Karen Peaton, you have the right to remain silent." The room gasped. Whispers turned into a wave of stunned murmurs as I pulled out the handcuffs. "This is a mistake," Karen shrieked. Panic cracked her voice. "I'm the victim here. I'm in charge of the Anna drama nest." "You can't do this." "Actually," I replied, securing the cuffs as she struggled against the truth, You were never in charge of anything legally. Your anadrama nest was never incorporated. Every fine you issued, every dollar you collected, it was all a scam. Detective Riley from the State Fraud Division stepped into view, holding up additional documents. Miss Peaton, you're also being charged federally with wire fraud, mail fraud, and tax evasion. You stole over $300,000 from your neighbors. What followed was a full public collapse. Karen began ranting about conspiracies, shadow governments, and police corruption, her videographer still filming her breakdown in real time. This is a setup? She screamed. You're all part of this. I was protecting your property values. But the crowd had heard enough. The room broke into spontaneous applause. Mrs. Patterson stood up and said what many had been thinking, that woman has bullied this neighborhood for years. Today, justice finally arrived. Then, Detective Riley addressed the still stunned residents. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been victims of organized fraud. Every cent you paid into Miss Peaton's so-called anadrama nest went straight into her personal account. You are all eligible for full reimbursement with damages. Watching her escorted out in handcuffs was a moment sweeter than any harvest. Her cries echoed through the parking lot while news crews captured every second for viewers across the state. As the community center emptied, neighbors came up to thank me, share their stories, and finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. The mountain air outside had never smelled more like freedom. Justice wasn't just symbolic, it was tangible. Karen Peaton was sentenced to federal prison, ordered to pay back $400,000 in restitution, and required to complete 500 hours of community service here, specifically on organic farms, to develop the respect for agriculture she had so long tried to destroy. The judge called it poetic justice. Even her own attorney argued that farm work bordered on cruel punishment. The bailiff actually chuckled out loud. Residents of Willowbrook received, on average, $8,000 each, money that changed lives. Some used it to fix up their homes. Others funded their children's education or finally took the vacations they'd put off for years. A new and properly registered anadrama nest was formed, with transparent financials, ethical leadership, and a by unanimous vote a standing bylaw permanently protecting agricultural activity. Willowbrook Estates had found its voice. Real democracy had finally arrived. As for the farm, it became more than I'd ever imagined. What started as a quiet place to recover from personal heartbreak turned into a vital community space that bridged city life and rural roots. The farm stand eventually expanded into a cooperative, bringing in goods from other nearby farmers and turning my little plot of land into something far greater than I ever expected. The local market we built grew into a thriving network that supported multiple farming families and offered city dwellers a meaningful connection to where their food really comes from. The Blackwood Harvest Festival turned into the most celebrated event in the county. Thousands of people attended to learn about sustainable agriculture, enjoy locally made products, and watch their children discover that vegetables don't just appear on supermarket shelves. That first festival raised $25,000 for scholarships, opening doors for rural students who wanted to study sustainable farming and agricultural sciences. In the midst of all this, personal joy found me where I least expected it. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the compassionate veterinarian who first visited during the peak of the chaos, became much more than a colleague. She became my partner in every way that matters. Her deep knowledge of livestock and her contagious laugh brought new life to both the farm and my heart. We're planning to exchange vows next spring, right here beneath the very apple trees Karen once tried to have removed. Our case set a powerful legal precedent. Montana passed the Rural Property Protection Act, mandating full transparency, legal incorporation for neighborhood associations, and specific protections for agricultural land. Soon, advocacy groups used our case as a model, and 3 other states followed suit with similar laws, helping rural communities defend themselves against unjust neighborhood control. Ironically, Karen's destructive behavior ended up shielding thousands of farmers she'd never even met. But the most profound change happened in Willowbrook itself. With Karen gone, people discovered they actually liked living near each other. Home values increased not because of control, but because of community. Boardroom squabbles gave way to backyard BBQs. Petty complaints were replaced by shared vegetable gardens. Residents stopped reporting each other and started helping one another. Even Braden Peaton, Karen's son, turned things around. After a heartfelt public apology and reparations to those he'd wronged, he rebuilt his reputation. Today, he develops agricultural-friendly housing projects that preserve farmland instead of wiping it out. His business thrives by embracing the rustic charm of the countryside without destroying its spirit. A Montana public television documentary about our journey sparked national conversations about the need for reform. Viewer feedback inspired even more documentaries, spotlighting other victims who gained the courage to speak up after hearing our story. Karen's fall didn't just end a reign of harassment, it ignited a movement that continues to protect property owners from exploitation and abuse. Right now, as I write this with our old cow Buttercup grazing nearby, and the smell of Sarah's homemade bread floating through the windows, I feel nothing but gratitude. Karen's campaign of harassment unintentionally gave me the life I never dreamed I needed: deep roots in the land, strong community ties, fulfilling work, true love, and the pride of standing up to bullies. The mountains carry the scent of ripening harvests and the joyful shouts of children visiting our educational programs. In the end, the best revenge wasn't retaliation, it was building something beautiful that lifted everyone around me. Karen taught me that bullies expose their own fear when they try to dominate others. But more importantly, she reminded me that regular people can accomplish remarkable things when they stop accepting intimidation and fight back against fraud. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you have your own nightmare experience with a neighborhood tyrant? Drop a comment below and share your story. You might be surprised by the legal options available and the community ready to stand with you. If you enjoyed seeing Karen face the consequences of her actions, make sure to subscribe to Anna Drama Nest for more real-life tales of entitled neighbors getting exactly what they deserve. And trust me, the California ranch case I'm covering next makes Karen look like an amateur in the world of harassment. Thanks for watching Anna Drama Nest, where neighbors stand together against toxic control, and karma always finds the way. If you like this story, hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more true neighborhood drama each week.